What if the serial killer wasn't acting alone because he had followers who worshipped every murder? A cult in Mexico drank human blood. A psychic in Japan beat people to death in the name of cleansing. And in America, panic masked real horror. These aren't legends. They're real cults with real bodies. A cloaked figure raises a blood-filled chalice to the sky, chanting in unison with followers who believe they're cleansing sin through murder. You might think this is a horror movie, but this was real, and it happened across Mexico, Japan, and even suburban America. This is the terrifying truth of cults that didn't just follow killers, they worshipped them. And the line between belief and bloodshed was erased completely. Welcome to Crime Cipher, the channel where true crime meets obsession, and killers aren't just caught, they're decoded. Subscribe if you crave the truth behind the darkest belief systems, and hit that like button if you think murder should never be a sacrament. Where cults meet killers. Across the world, there exists a chilling overlap between charismatic cult leaders and brutal serial killers. While most cults focus on faith, control, or money, these took it one step further. They made murder a sacrament. We're diving into 4 of the most shocking cases, including Mexico's infamous Narco-Satanists, a Japanese psychic killer, and the American panic that blurred fiction and horror into one. These rituals happen in modern times, with real victims and real consequences. Let's begin where the nightmare started. The jungles of Matamoros, Mexico. The Narco-Satanists of Mexico. In 1989, Adolfo Constanzo, a self-proclaimed high priest of Palo Mayombe, led a cult that performed ritualistic killings to bless their drug shipments. Known as El Padrino, Constanzo promised his followers immunity from bullets if they performed cleansing sacrifices. His partner in terror, Sara Aldrete, known as La Madrina, the Godmother, helped organize these gruesome acts. The cult's most notorious crime was the kidnapping and ritual murder of 21-year-old American student Mark Kilroy, who was tortured and killed inside a shrine, surrounded by blood, bones, and occult symbols. When police finally uncovered their ranch, they found 15 mutilated bodies in a cauldron filled with human remains. Magdalena Solis, the High Priestess of Blood. Traveling back to 1963, deep in Tamaulipas, another Mexican horror unfolded. Magdalena Solis wasn't just a cult leader, she was worshipped as a goddess. Her followers, mostly illiterate peasants, were told she was the reincarnated Aztec deity. What followed was weeks of human sacrifice and blood drinking. Victims were tortured, mutilated, and drained of blood, which was mixed with narcotics and consumed as part of the rituals. Solis ordered her disciples to kill anyone who doubted her divinity. When police finally intervened, they found dozens of graves and testimonies so disturbing that some officers reportedly left the force. Solis was eventually captured and sentenced. But the trauma she left behind still echoes in the mountains she ruled with fear. Drumstick deaths in Japan, the cult of Sachiko Eto. In the quiet town of Sukagawa, Japan, the 1990s saw a wave of inexplicable deaths. Psychic and self-proclaimed healer Sachiko Eto claimed she could cleanse evil spirits by beating them out with sacred taiko drumsticks. Her cult believed she was spiritually anointed. Over a 2-year period, she and her followers killed 6 people during brutal beating, believing they were exorcising demons. Victims were often tied up, blindfolded, and hit for hours until they stopped breathing. Eto's serene face during trial shocked the nation. In 2005, she was sentenced to death and executed in 2012. Japan had witnessed one of its most terrifying spiritual crimes, proof that even in a technologically advanced society, belief can still kill. Satanic Panic, the Fall River murders. Back in the US during the late 1970s, Fall River, Massachusetts became the epicenter of panic. When the bodies of 3 women were found, mutilated and left in ritual poses, the public feared the worst, satanic cults in their midst. One of the main suspects, Carl Drew, claimed he was framed, but prosecutors insisted that Drew led a cult of sex workers and drug dealers who offered sacrifices to Satan. The case was complicated by unreliable testimonies and media hysteria. Though Drew was convicted, many still question whether the real story was buried under the moral panic of the era. To this day, Fall River remains a haunting example of how fear, faith, and violence can twist the truth into myth. The pattern of psychological control. So how does one person convince others to kill? Cult psychology revolves around isolation, manipulation, and repetition. Leaders use ritual and fear to erase individual identity, replacing it with a groupthink mentality. Once obedience is total, violence becomes ritual, justified, and even celebrated. These leaders weren't monsters in the beginning. They were skilled manipulators who recognized the human hunger for meaning and twisted it into bloodshed. Expert psychologists agree. Once someone believes they are serving a divine purpose, they can commit horrors they would have once found unimaginable. And in these cases, that belief became fatal. Law enforcement versus faith gone mad. Each of these cults eventually collapsed, but only after years of bloodshed. In Matamoros, Adolfo Constanzo ordered a disciple to shoot him as police closed in. Sara Aldrete was captured and sentenced to over 600 years. Solís was imprisoned for life, her temple of terror dismantled. Sachiko Eto's executions stunned Japan, while the Fall River case still sparks debate. Authorities often found themselves powerless in the face of cult secrecy and public disbelief. Even more chilling is how many of these leaders were only stopped after foreign victims were targeted. Local authorities were often powerless or unwilling to act when the victims were poor, local, or marginalized. In Magdalena Solis' case, the first bodies were dismissed as drug casualties. In Japan, Eto's crimes were initially viewed as domestic abuse. It's a pattern we see even today. When belief is shielded by religion, enforcement hesitates, and bodies accumulate. That's why we investigate these stories at Crime Cipher, because ignoring belief-based violence only feeds it. The forgotten victims and their stories. Behind every cult leader and gruesome ritual lie the real stories that often go untold, the victims. People like Mark Kilroy weren't just names in police reports. He was a medical student on spring break, full of life and ambition. The followers who were killed for doubting Magdalena Solis were just poor villagers looking for hope. The Japanese victims in Eto's cult trusted her healing promises. Cult tactics still thrive today. It's easy to assume that these cults were relics of the past, but modern digital cults are forming every day. From doomsday preachers to modern incel forums, the playbook remains the same. Isolation, radicalization, obedience. The next Adolfo Constanzo may not be in the jungle. He might be on your screen. And the next ritual might not require blood, but it will demand your mind. What we can learn from the cult killings. These cases aren't just history, they're warnings. The danger of unchecked faith, the seduction of charismatic leaders, and the human capacity to obey, no matter how monstrous the command. Every cult starts with a need for belonging, healing, or power, and when evil enters that need, it thrives. From Mexico to Massachusetts, Japan to the digital world, these stories teach us that the line between faith and fanaticism is razor thin. And once that line is crossed, innocence dies. When cults transform murder into worship, when killers become gods, who answers for the blood spill? These aren't just serial killers. They're myth makers, leaders of deadly faiths that claimed dozens of lives across decades. But if we don't study them, if we forget their victims, history might just repeat itself. Comment below. Which cult case shocked you the most? Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week on Crime Cipher, we're going deeper into the Candyman conspiracies. A child killer whose crimes may have gone far beyond one man. This is Crime Cipher, where truth is darker than fiction. Stay curious, stay cautious,